It was a freezing dawn, like any other on the outskirts of the Russian capital. The lights in the hangars flickered, the control towers hummed with circuits, and in the underground corridors the constant murmur of generators echoed. For many in those complexes, the war had become routine. Planes coming and going, cargo piling up, pilots returning with soot-stained faces, and mechanics whispering about exhausted parts and impossible deadlines. But that night, the night analysts would later describe as the operation that shattered the old paradigm of air defense, something darker and more patient was approaching across the plain, invisible to eyes still trusting solely in radars and outdated doctrines. What follows is a documentary reconstruction, a blend of fictional testimonies inspired by real trends, public data, and staged scenes crafted to narrate with force, of how a swarm of drones, a chain of electronic deceptions, and months of patient intelligence turned two airbases worth hundreds of millions into smoking ruins. Where chronicle meets military investigation and journalistic narrative, the pieces form a mosaic: strategy, technology, and the uncertainty of a war rewriting its rules at low altitude. The lights of Moscow shone silently that night, as if the heart of Russia were asleep under a false sense of invulnerability. Just a few kilometers from the Kremlin, two of the country's most protected air bases, Kubinka and Chkolovsky, rested like impregnable fortresses. Their economic value exceeded $270 million, but their strategic importance could not be measured in numbers. They housed the muscle of Russia's air power, the aircraft sustaining the bombings over Ukraine, the control towers directing military traffic, the fuel depots keeping the Kremlin's war machine alive. Kubinka was not just a base, it was a symbol. Home to the legendary Russian Knights, Moscow's most famous aerobatic squadron, and shelter to the Su-57 Felon fighters, Vladimir Putin's technological pride. Each aircraft, costing over $35 million, represented years of propaganda, power displays, and speeches of military superiority. Meanwhile, Chkolovsky served as the great logistical lung. IL-76 and AN-124 transport planes took off and landed daily, loaded with missiles, munitions, and troops, feeding the war in Donbass and Zaporizhia. For 3 years, those runways had been the launching pads of destruction over Ukraine. But in the early hours of an ordinary Tuesday, at 2:17 a.m., everything changed forever. Radars at the Moscow Regional Air Defense Center began flickering with confusing signals. First 5, then 15, then over 90 dots moving at low altitude, skimming the treetops, outside traditional detection angles. They were drones, but not ordinary drones. They were a lethal pack, a Ukrainian swarm of nearly 100 units programmed to strike with surgical precision. The Russian operators couldn't believe it. Moscow was the most protected city on the planet. The S-400 defense umbrella, the Panzer S-1 systems, and the Nebo-M radars had been designed to repel even intercontinental ballistic missile attacks. The idea that a swarm of drones could penetrate to the aerial heart of the Kremlin seemed absurd, until that night. The attack was not born in a day. Months earlier, in a secret bunker outside Kiev, a team of engineers, intelligence analysts, and Ukrainian military officers had begun to plan what they themselves called the master stroke. Around a table covered with satellite maps, partly provided by Western allies, they traced impossible flight routes, millimeter curves to dodge radars, and blind spots in Russian systems. The drones chosen were a blend of two worlds. On one hand, the UJ-26 Beaver ER, long-range kamikaze drones with an autonomy of more than 1,200 kilometers. Each carried a 40-kilogram warhead capable of piercing reinforced hangars. On the other, the AQ-400 Scythe, cheap drones built of wood and recycled fiber, worth less than $10,000 each, but with a crucial mission: to saturate enemy radars with false signals, forcing Russia to waste million-dollar missiles on empty targets. The final trick was the Banshee 9 drones, modified with electronic warfare pods emitting interference capable of temporarily blinding Russian radar systems. Ukraine would not attack with brute force, but with cunning, distraction, saturation, and surgical precision. In the Moscow Air Defense Headquarters, the generals slept soundly. Intelligence reports insisted Ukraine had no capacity to reach the capital with massive attacks. The S-400 defense umbrella could detect stealth aircraft 600 kilometers away. The Panzer S-1s had proven effective against drone swarms in Syria, and national pride dictated that the Russian capital was untouchable. But there was a problem the High Command ignored. Their systems had been designed for traditional threats, missiles, planes, not for a horde of small, cheap drones programmed to fly low, hugging the ground, invisible to technological eyes. The first drones sliced through the defenses like knives through butter. At 2:23 a.m., an explosion lit up the sky over Kubinka. A Su-57 parked on the runway was hit directly, turning into a fireball. Russian sensors reacted late, and by the time the first missiles were launched, dozens of drones were already flying over the hangars. The fire multiplied. One after another, fuel depots began to explode, sending black columns of smoke visible from the highway connecting Moscow to Smolensk. In Shkolovsky, the story was even more devastating. 3 Il-76 transport planes were destroyed within minutes, along with tons of ammunition stored in underground hangars. Russian soldiers ran in desperation, firing machine guns into the sky as if they could stop the avalanche. But every drone shot down meant little against dozens more continuing their path toward the targets. In less than 40 minutes, 2 of Russia's most protected air bases had turned into an inferno of flames, smoke, and twisted steel. In Moscow, the Kremlin was notified immediately. Vladimir Putin, according to close sources, was awakened in the early hours with a phrase he had never wanted to hear: "Mr. President, Moscow has been hit." The blow was not just military. It was psychological. Ukraine's message was clear: if we can destroy your most secure bases, we can reach even further. Initial calculations spoke of bi-million-dollar losses, at least 6 Su-57s reduced to ashes, 3 Il-76s destroyed, entire fuel and ammunition depots wiped out. Satellite images leaked the next day confirmed a scene of smoking ruins, with craters that looked like open scars on Russian soil. Russian propaganda tried to downplay it, speaking of minor damage and successful interceptions, but the scale was impossible to hide. Videos recorded by civilians on the outskirts of Moscow showed columns of fire piercing the night. Exhausted firefighters leaked comments on social media. We had never seen anything like this. The attack changed everything. It was not just a tactical strike, it was a direct challenge to the heart of Russian power. Ukraine had proven that even Moscow was not safe. Western analysts compared it to a geopolitical earthquake. Some called it Russia's military 9/11 because it not only destroyed infrastructure but shattered the perception of security Moscow had spent decades building. And while the rubble still burned, in Kiev, the air was filled with a sense of victory. This was not just about drones, but about a message to the world. The war had entered a new era.